Evan's phone buzzed at 2:13 a.m. He groaned, blinking at the screen. A single notification glowed back at him. "I miss you." It was from Harper, his ex-girlfriend. They'd broken up 6 months ago, and Harper hadn't taken it well. She'd shown up at his workplace, called his friends, even left letters in his mailbox. He blocked her on everything after the night she stood outside his apartment, screaming his name. The message shouldn't have come through. Evan sat up, his pulse quickening. His number was unlisted and she didn't know his new address. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture. Evan's breath hitched. It was a photo of him asleep in bed taken from the foot of his mattress. His head whipped around to the dark corners of his room. Nothing stirred. His door was locked. The windows were shut. He clutched the phone tighter, his fingers trembling. Another buzz. Another photo. This time, the angle had shifted slightly. The photo showed him looking at his phone, exactly as he was right now. He bolted from the bed and flipped on the lights. His bedroom was empty. Tsk! A video. Evan didn't want to open it, but his thumb betrayed him. The video started in darkness, shaky breathing filling the audio. Then the camera moved, panning across his bedroom. The same bedroom he stood in, the same rumpled sheets, the same poster on the wall. The breathing grew louder, and the screen filled with his face, eyes wide, pale, panicking. He turned around. Harper stood inches away, her face split into a twisted grin. Her eyes glinted in the dim light as she raised a jagged shard of glass. "Miss me?" she whispered. The screen of his phone went black. So did the world around him. Lila sat motionless in her car, the engine off, the cold seeping in through the cracked window. Across the dimly lit street, the glow of her ex-boyfriend Nate's apartment flickered. She had parked there for over an hour now, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the third-floor window where shadows moved behind drawn curtains. It had been 2 months since Nate had left her, his voice calm but firm as he explained it wasn't working anymore. 2 months since she had spiraled into a void of questions without answers. He had said it was mutual, but how could it be? Lila hadn't agreed to this ending. The front door of the building opened. Her pulse quickened as she slouched lower in her seat. Nate stepped out, his jacket slung over his shoulder, his familiar gait making her chest tighten. But then she noticed someone else. A woman followed him out. She was laughing, her hand brushing his arm. Lila's grip tightened, her nails digging into her palms. Her mind raced as she studied the woman, a brunette shorter than her, wearing heels that clicked on the pavement. She didn't plan to get out of the car, but her legs moved on their own. She followed them, her footsteps quiet as she stayed in the shadows. The couple turned a corner, oblivious to the figure trailing them. They entered a cozy bar with glowing string lights and a steady hum of conversation. Lila hesitated outside the window, her breath fogging the glass. Nate leaned in close to the woman, his smile brighter than it had ever been with her. Her chest felt heavy, her vision narrowing as jealousy and rage churned inside her. Before she realized what she was doing, she pushed the door open and walked in. The noise of the bar swallowed her footsteps as she approached their table. Nate didn't notice her at first, but when he did, his face froze. "Leela?" he said, his voice a mix of shock and discomfort. The woman looked between them, confused. "Who is this?" Lila smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm just an old friend," she said, her voice saccharine. "Funny running into you here, Nate." Her ex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Lila, this isn't the time." "It's never the time, is it?" She interrupted, her voice trembling now. "I gave you everything, Nate, everything, and this is how it ends? With her?" The woman stood, looking at Nate. "I think I'll give you two a moment." Lila's eyes darted to the woman as she walked away, then back to Nate. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I see you, Nate. Every night. Don't think for a second I've gone anywhere." Nate's face paled, his hands trembling slightly. Lila straightened up, her expression eerily calm as she turned and left the bar. Outside, she took a deep breath of the cold air, her heart steady now. He would understand soon enough. He had chosen to leave, but she wasn't letting go. On her way to the car, Lila froze. There she was, the girl Nate was with, standing by the curb, smoking a cigarette and tapping on her phone. The glow of the streetlight illuminated her face, carefree and oblivious. Lila's breath hitched, her mind clouded with anger, pain, and something darker, something primal. Her legs moved before she could stop herself. She reached into her pocket, her fingers wrapping tightly around the cold metal grip of the .22 Magnum she always carried. The weight of it felt steady, familiar, like an extension of her fury. The girl looked up, startled, just as Lila raised the gun. Her hands shook for the briefest of moments, but then a single thought cut through the haze. He deserves to feel what I feel. And then, without a word, she pulled the trigger. Marcus had moved on, or so he thought. His breakup with Vanessa 6 months ago had been tumultuous, her tears and rage lingering like ghosts. But now there was Sophie, sweet, understanding Sophie, who he'd met online. Her texts were like a balm to his bruised heart, and her face, delicate features framed by auburn curls, had captivated him. When Sophie invited him to her place for dinner, Marcus hesitated, but his longing to escape his loneliness won. Her address was in an old part of town, the kind of neighborhood where streetlights flickered and shadows danced on cobblestone streets. He knocked on the door, and it creaked open, revealing Sophie, or so he thought. She was wearing a red dress, her hair glowing under the dim entryway light. "Marcus," she breathed, pulling him into a warm hug. But something felt off. Her scent was familiar, but not in the way he'd hoped. It smelled like the lavender oil Vanessa used to wear. As they sat at the small, candlelit dining table, Sophie's eyes glinted in the wavering light. "It's so nice to finally meet," she said, her voice carrying an eerie undercurrent. Before Marcus could respond, he felt a sharp prick on his neck. His vision blurred as he collapsed to the floor, Sophie standing over him with a syringe in hand. When he woke, the air was damp and cold. The dim bulbs swinging overhead illuminated concrete walls lined with shelves of jars, pickled vegetables, candles, and something red he couldn't identify. His wrists were bound to the arms of a wooden chair. "Vanessa?" he gasped. She stepped into the light, her auburn wig gone, her once beautiful face twisted with malice. "Did you really think you could replace me?" she hissed, tossing the wig to the floor. "I was Sophie. I've been Sophie this whole time." Marcus's heart pounded. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you left me," she said, her voice cracking with madness. "And now you'll never leave again." She moved to a corner of the basement, revealing a steel door with locks lining its edge. Marcus realized with horror that it wasn't just a basement. It was a cage. "You'll learn to love me again," Vanessa whispered, locking the door behind her as she ascended the stairs. "We've got all the time in the world." The bulbs swayed overhead, casting wild shadows as Marcus screamed into the void, the sounds swallowed by the oppressive dark.
I hope you enjoyed this short story. If you did, please consider leaving a like, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing for more stories.